Welcome to Crown TV. Immerse yourself with a captivating audio from our stories. We provide an alternative way to read books in audio. We upload many audiobooks as possible, from bestsellers to timeless classic. Subscribe and stay tuned for new upload.
Episode 181, Back to Family. "Thank you," Alex said to Nellie. She didn't look at him. She just kept working with the food in her pan. "Why are you thanking me? I think those two women are eyesores," she said. He felt a bit ashamed of her. He thought that if she was the only one in her truck after he left each day, she must feel very lonely. "Why do you tolerate them so much?" she asked, as she sat on a stool and watched him pack up. He was stunned and replied, "We're old classmates after all. They just said a few words to me. They didn't try to beat me up or anything. I don't want to be like them. If I start hurling insults as they do, I might become like them." "Oh, you have much more patience than I do. If someone gets upset with me, I'll get 10 times more upset back at them," she said. He didn't say anything. In his 7 years of poverty training, the humiliation, ridicule, and bullying that he had endured had been unimaginable. "Hey, more than a month has gone by, so why haven't you called your family yet? You're not going to die alone like me, are you?" she asked. Her question touched his heart, as the memories of his family came flooding back to him. He had started to lose his memories of his grandparents, father and mother, since he had been sent to Texas for poverty training 7 years ago. He had not seen his parents in all that time, and he had only met his grandfather once on Harmony Island a few months ago. He sniffled a little as he looked at her with watery eyes. "Did your family treat you badly?" she asked. Her question surprised him, and he replied, "No, it's just that thinking of my family makes me sad." "Did your family treat you badly?" She stared at him, but she didn't seem to understand what he had meant by this question. She appeared to stop and think about something, and she became a little gloomy. "I hate thinking about my family. They're worse than some of the worst villains out there." He was surprised to hear this. "What did your family do to you that makes you hate them so much?" She looked at him with a painful expression. "Just don't talk to me about them anymore, okay? They're all dead to me now." After she had finished talking, she grabbed a drink out of the refrigerator and walked out of the food truck. He was concerned, since they had just had an emotional conversation, and he wanted to go with her. But she said, "Just look after the truck while I'm gone. If I come back and I find you being lazy, I'll deduct your pay by $150. She went for a walk alone. More than an hour passed before she returned. She appeared to be back to her usual self and continued bossing Alex around with an occasional kick to his rear end. Despite being kicked, Alex was very happy to see that she was doing better. Alex returned to his rented room that evening. He lay in bed and checked for information about Richmond University. Summer vacation was coming to an end, and classes at this Washington, D.C. university were resuming in a few days. He thought that if he and Nellie could park the food truck near the university, he would have more opportunities to see Leona. He put down his phone and was about to go to sleep when it started to ring. He saw a number with a Washington area code, but he couldn't guess who was calling. He answered the phone. "Hello, Alex, it's Philippa," said the caller. "Philippa? How did you get my number?" he asked. "Hey, it wasn't easy. I had someone help me crack into your WhatsApp and find out your number," she said. "Oh, what's the matter?" Alex wondered why she was calling him, as they had not had much contact with each other in high school. There'll be a meeting with people originally from Texas at the Ruby Hotel tomorrow. We should go there together. People from Texas who now live in Washington, D.C. will all be there, and maybe they can help you. Come with me, said Philippa. I don't want to go. You can go by yourself, but thanks for telling me. He did want to attend the meeting, but his lack of funds prevented him. Hey, you're so boring. How can you refuse my invitation? Are you still a bachelor? You really don't understand the advantages that it can bring you, she said to him, and then continued. Are you afraid that you can't afford to pay for your meal? Don't worry, you won't have to pay. A boss will be there who's inviting everyone this time. Up to 100 people will attend, so we can go together. He muttered. She had warmly invited him, and he didn't have anything against Philippa. On top of it, he wouldn't need to pay for it, so after a few seconds of mulling it over, he said, Okay, I'll go with you. Okay, good. It's tomorrow evening in meeting room 304 at the Ruby Hotel. I'll see you there, she said and hung up the phone. Philippa was sitting with Miriam at a coffee shop downtown, and they sipped tea. Miriam, why did you want me to bring Alex? I thought you said that you hated him, she asked suspiciously. Yes, it's because I hate him so much that I'm letting him come, said Miriam, as she took a swallow from her cup. Philippa had a bad feeling. It felt like the phone call she had just made to Alex might end up hurting him. She said in a low voice, We're all high school classmates. Some of the unhappy things that happen in high school are water under the bridge. Don't you agree? No. Miriam stared at her angrily and said, If it wasn't for him, I could have gone to a top university. What school do I go to now? I go to a second-rate local college. So my whole life path was changed by him. Philippa, do you know that because of this, my family and friends laughed at me for 2 years? It's all thanks to Alex. I want to see him ridiculed by lots of people. I want him to have a taste of what I had to deal with, and then he can finally see how it feels. Philippa knew what had happened all those years ago. Why did Miriam think it was Alex's fault? What had happened to Miriam was that when she was taking her final exams, her pen had stopped working properly, and she had gotten so flustered and annoyed that she had failed. Philippa remained silent. The next day, Alex and Nellie drove the food truck to the popular West Lake scenic area. It was the end of summer vacation, and people were seizing the opportunity to make their last summer trips before the season ended. There were lots of tourists that day, so business was doing well. At 7 in the evening, there was a steady stream of customers. Alex told Nellie that he had to leave because he was going to a meeting in a hotel, but Nellie refused to let him go. As he didn't want to break his promise to Philippa, he finally negotiated with her to deduct $30 from his pay to compensate for his absence. He had planned to take a bath and change into clean clothes before he left, but it was already too late. He had to go to the Ruby Hotel in his dirty work clothes. While waiting at the bus stop, his phone rang. He picked it up and saw that it wasn't Philippa's number. He answered the call. Alexei? A woman's voice came over the phone. He froze as soon as he heard this strange but familiar voice and manner of address. Alexei? Said the woman again because he had not responded. He couldn't believe what he had just heard was real. Alexei, what's wrong with you? It's your mother. My child, what's wrong with you? Why don't you speak? Said the woman on the other side of the phone in a slightly anxious tone. He started to sniffle. Mom? Alex choked up, and he could hardly speak. Tears started to fall from his eyes, which he tried to wipe off with his sleeve, but they just kept flowing. Hello, my dear boy. Your mother has missed you so much, said Flora, Alex's mother. I've missed you so much, too. He choked out the words. Okay, son, We'll meet soon. I'm in Washington, D.C. now. I've reserved the best meeting room for us at the Orange Hotel. You should go to this hotel so you can let your mom have a good look at you. Really? Mom? You're really here? He was overjoyed. After hearing his mother's affirmative reply, he said, Mom, I've made a promise to go to a meeting with someone today, but when I'm finished there, I'll come and see you straight away. Can't you just push your meeting back to a later time? Asked his mother. Mom, I've already promised my classmate that I'd go with her. Didn't you and Dad teach us when we were kids to keep our promises? I'll see you when I'm finished there, said Alex. Good, son. I'm glad my words are still in your heart. Well, you go to the party first, and after the party, come over to the hotel and see me, she said. Alex agreed and then hung up the phone. His eyes were still red, and the other people at the bus stop looked at him in surprise. They didn't understand that he was excited that he was going to see his mother. When the bus arrived, Alex hopped on, found a seat, and sat down. He looked out the window at the street as the bus drove on, but he was in a daze with his thoughts. His mind was filled with images of his mother from his childhood. He remembered that his mother had been very strict, yet doted on him. Once, he accidentally hit his cousin when they were playing together. His uncle had wanted to organize an investigation with the teacher into what had happened. He had wanted to punish him with a beating, but his mother had not allowed it. Alex had been so angry with his uncle that after his uncle had left, his mother had made him stand in a corner until the next morning. When he was 6 years old, his parents had been promoted to head the family's businesses in Southern Europe, so they left the country. He could only visit them during spring break every year. And now it had been 7 years since Alex had started his poverty training, and his family had never been together in all that time. Thinking of his childhood, Alex couldn't help but be fascinated. At that moment, the bus arrived at his destination. Alex got off the bus and saw a towering building in the distance. It was the Ruby Hotel. He walked to the front of the hotel. As he was about to go in, he saw an old woman pushing a bicycle nearby. Plastic bottles and cardboard were piled up high on the bicycle. She was careless, so the plastic and cardboard fell off and spread out all over the sidewalk. He ran over to help her pick things up. As he picked up empty plastic bottles, he chatted with the woman and learned that her son had died in a car accident. "Thank you, you're a kind young man," she said to him. Her old eyes looked teary. She sighed. "If my son was alive, he might just be like you. Can you call me Mom?" Seeing the twinkle in her eyes, he thought about how he had not seen his own mother for 7 years. He was still so sad. But this woman had been separated from her son by his death, and now she was miserable in her old age. "Mom?" Her request hit him in the heart, and he couldn't help but also shed a few tears. She cried and took out a couple of dollars from her pocket. She said, "Young man, take this. Thank you very much." He couldn't accept her money, but she insisted on giving it to him. He knew that if he didn't accept it, she would feel sad. So he said thank you and took it. She continued to push her bicycle as he walked into the hotel. In a BMW not far away, a driver said to his boss, who sat in the back seat, "Boss, now that young man is really shameless. He just helped that old woman pick up plastic bottles, and then he asked her for money. Is that man crazy?" Episode 182. What's that smell? A man in his 40s was sitting in the back seat of the car. He smoked a cigarette, puffed out a smoke ring, and said with a gentle smile, "Don't you see that boy looks very ragged? I don't think he has a job. He needs the old woman's money so he can eat." "But then he walked into the Ruby Hotel," the driver said. Hey, you're such a fool. Can't you see that he can't afford to eat? Maybe he's looking for work. I think he went into the Ruby to ask for a job as a security guard or something. It's hard to know what he's doing," replied his boss. "You're smart, boss." The driver scratched his head and asked, "By the way, boss, aren't you going to treat everyone to their meal at the Ruby tonight? It's almost 8 o'clock. Don't you need to go up now?" "Aren't you just my driver, or are you running my schedule too? I have to wait until they're almost all here before I can make my appearance. That way I can make more of an entrance," said the man. "Okay, you're clever, boss," the driver said with a smile. Alex found the meeting room that Philippa had told him to go to. He adjusted his clothes and hair in a mirror and walked in. There were 10 tables in the room and 8 or 9 people at each table for a total of 80 or 90 guests. Almost everyone had arrived. On a wall along the side of the room, there was a long red banner with the words "Texans Meet in Washington, D.C." Half of the people in the room had a Texan accent. Alex was about to go inside, but his phone rang. It was his mother, so he answered it. It turned out that Alex's mother missed him a lot. She had already reserved a room in the best hotel in Washington, but she was eager to see her son. So she had come to the Ruby Hotel and reserved that hotel's best meeting room, room 888. She asked him if he was already at the party and if he could come to see her first if he wasn't. But he said that he was already in the meeting room 304. So his mother gave up and told him to just see her as soon as it was over. He hung up the phone and thought about how they were both now in the same hotel. He was very excited. "Alex!" Philippa had seen him walk in. "Why did you come here dressed like that? Come over here and let's sit at this table," said Philippa. He smiled and followed her to a table. To his surprise, Miriam was also at the same table. "Philippa, who is this? Why are you dressed like that?" asked Miriam. A few people in the room also noticed Alex's appearance. "Yes, his clothes are dirty. What's that on his forehead? Sweat? Why couldn't he take a shower first?" said a man sitting there. "He's a little smelly. What's that smell?" A woman sitting next to him held her nose. Alex had not expected such a response, as he had thought that everyone would be very kind. Am I that naive? He wondered. He had not taken a shower, so he couldn't disagree with a few complaints. He tried to smile. "Miss Henley, you haven't finished what you were saying just now. Let's talk about it again," said a young man sitting near her as he smiled. Miriam was the most beautiful woman at the table, in the whole room for that matter. The men weren't really interested in what she was talking about. Rather, they wanted to impress her and win her favor to see if they could score a date. The young man's proposal received unanimous approval from the rest of the table. "Oh, I won't tell you about that again. Rather, I'll tell you something more interesting. I can guarantee that no one has heard of it." She flipped her hair. "Oh, tell us before the food comes so you can relieve our boredom," said the young man. The other people at the table looked very interested. "Ahem." She cleared her throat, glanced over at Alex, and then she began to say, "Last time I came back from a tour with a friend, I got off at the high-speed railway station, and then I went to check in at the Crown Hotel that was nearby." She had always wanted to find a super-rich boyfriend, so when Jake Grant wasn't present, she described him as a friend rather than a boyfriend to allow other men an opening. What if she finally met another man with more money than him? Alex wondered. "Crown Hotel? I haven't stayed there before. It costs at least $500 a night, which is too expensive," blurted a young man at the table. "Yes, I guess that Miss Henley can stay at the Crown Hotel. I'm envious," said another. Her listeners were all commenting on this expensive hotel. Alex also listened to her talk about it. He had a bad feeling. looked at her and scoffed a little. When I got to the front desk, I saw a man waiting to check into a room, but he was wearing terrible clothes that looked like they didn't cost more than $20. His pants and shoes were covered with dust, and his face had a lot of sweat, just like... She pointed at Alex and continued. The man, who looked similar to this guy, was standing there waiting to check in. The other people looked at Alex with incredulity and started to talk among themselves. What? People like him stay at the Crown Hotel? Are you sure about that? Asked the young man. I'm wearing more than $300 worth of clothes, and I can't afford to stay at that hotel. How can a loser with cheap clothes like him do it? You must be kidding us. He must have asked the front desk lady if there were any waiter jobs at the hotel. How can a loser stay at that hotel? Asked another, curiously. No. He didn't come to look for a job. He came to stay at that hotel. First, he asked the front desk lady for a big and elegant room, and then he wasn't happy with it, so he asked for the most expensive luxury presidential suite. Do you know what card he pulled out to pay for the room? He used a Metro Skybank Premier card, she said. The others looked at her in surprise. Damn it. The luxury presidential suite at the Crown Hotel costs $4,000 a night. But that's nothing. The Metro Skybank card in his hand indicated that his personal assets reached at least $20 million, exclaimed one person. She continued, I thought that this young man must be wealthy, but very low-key. A lot of people are so unassuming. When you look at a small car driving down the road, that person might have more than 10 Ferraris in their garage. They just drive their small car when they're tired of driving their fancy cars. The young man was startled by what she had described, and the others were the same. They all fixed their eyes on her. What happened afterward? Did the manager of the hotel also come out to meet him? They interrogated. Ha ha, she giggled. But the others didn't understand what she was getting at, so she said, Just like you, I thought this was a low-key, super rich man, but I didn't expect that the front desk lady wouldn't be able to get his card to work. Finally, she asked if he had another card or some other way to pay. So he rummaged through his backpack, but only found a couple of $100 in his wallet. So he couldn't pay for the room, and then he ran away. I don't know where I could go to get a room looking like such a mess with a stupid card. If he dared to come into my shop, I'd chase him out, someone exclaimed. I know, right? Miriam said with a smile. She looked at Alex and asked, Alex, do you think that man was funny? Alex had his head down as he was looking at his phone and didn't answer her. Why has Lester not arrived yet? It's already 20 minutes after 8. Many people started to notice that Lester Yates, who was in charge of the event, had not yet arrived. Mr. Yates is going to say a few words to us, so he should be here soon. Let's start serving the food now. Miss Miriam Henley can preside over things, said the host. When a man saw that Lester, the leader of this group, had sent a message, he stood up and said in a loud voice, Who is Miss Miriam Henley? I am. Miriam stood up, motioned to all the people, and said modestly, I've met with Mr. Yates a few times. He asks me to preside over this event. I'd like to get things started. Miriam called the waiter over and asked them to start serving the food. The relationship between Miriam and Lester wasn't as simple as she had implied. She was still Jake's girlfriend, but she had been leading Lester on for several months. It was on her initiative that she was hosting that day. Soon all sorts of dishes were served around the room. Well, before we start, allow me to say a few words. This is a gathering for fellow Texans, and we will help each other in the future. It's our first meeting, so I suggest that we all introduce ourselves in turn and tell everyone a little about what we do. This way, if we ever need help, we'll know who we can ask. Her proposal was approved by all present. Alex looked at her as she stood on the stage, but he couldn't help frowning. Philippa gently nudged him and looked at him apologetically. "I'm sorry, I shouldn't have brought you here." He smiled faintly and said, "It's okay." He thought that although he sold pancakes, he could take care of himself and that there was nothing to be ashamed of. After he had this thought, he was much calmer and continued eating. "Well, let's start now. My name is Miriam. I'm still studying at university, so I might not be able to help you in this city. I have to rely on your help more at this stage in my life," she concluded. Although it didn't matter if she was in the city or not, she looked beautiful, so no one looked down on her. Her voice brought comfort and love to the men present. The next step was for the others to stand up and introduce themselves. "I'm an executive with a major retail car company. If you want to buy a car, you can come to see me," said a young man with a smile. "I'm a university professor. If you're having any problems in education, please talk about it with me," said another, adjusting his glasses. "I'm with a major online sales company," came another voice. "I work at a hospital," said another. One by one, they all talked about their jobs. Nobody wanted to lose face in front of their fellow Texans. Even if they were just a minor staff member, they had to describe how powerful their company was. After all, everyone was impressed by their determination and assertiveness. "Okay, you can go next. Please stand up and introduce yourself," Miriam said, excitedly looking at Alex. Episode 183. Help Me with Pancakes? Alex put down his knife and fork and stood up. As soon as the group saw that he was dressed in dirty clothes with messy hair, like a man from a street stall, they started to whisper. "That man looks so ragged," whispered a woman. "What does he do? It's disrespectful to come to this meeting dressed like that," replied a man. "Shh, maybe people don't like to show off, but they're actually rich. There are lots of rich people who like to pretend to be poor," nudged another. Alex calmly said, "Hello, everybody. My name is Alex, and I drive a food truck with a friend to sell things on the streets of Washington, D.C. One of our most popular items is pancakes. If you stop by one day, I can make you one for free." He gave a faint smile and sat down. As soon as he finished speaking, the people who were present were stunned for a moment. They didn't have any confidence in someone who wasn't working for a company. How could a pancake seller speak so casually to them? Everyone had something to say about it. "He's a pancake seller? Is this job even worth mentioning?" said someone under their breath. "A pancake is only a few dollars. I don't think he could earn even $1,000 a month. After food and rent, he would have no money left over," spoke another. "I'm surprised this kind of person has the nerve to join this association. The most important person here is a man with a monthly salary of over $20,000. What can he do to help us as a pancake seller?" said a woman snootily. For a while, Alex became the object of discussion for the whole group. Some people ridiculed him, some satirized him, and some even went so far as to despise him. In their eyes, he was the person with the lowest status in the room. Miriam, who was standing in front of him, gave him a look and walked over to his side. She looked at him with affection, turned to face the crowd, and said with a smile, "I seem to recognize him. Not long ago I met him outside the Eden." "No, how? How could a pancake seller be at the Eden restaurant? Miss Miriam, you can't be right," said a young man in disbelief. The others didn't believe her either, and looked at her with puzzled faces. "Ha, everyone is wrong. I saw him driven away by the security guard outside the building. You won't believe what he did. He confessed his love to Miss Marvel of the Tenuco Group, and she refused him. He also argued with Daryl Brennan, who had taken Miss Marvel out to dinner." "What? He confessed his love to Miss Marvel? This kid's a tough guy, a pancake seller who wants to climb high and dream big dreams," said a young man with a smirk. "When I look at that boy's face, I know he's a greedy man. Greedy for money. The Marvel family is one of the wealthiest families in the city. He's a pancake seller with big daydreams," said a man with disgust. "This boy reminds me of people in the African grassland. A small man who dares to challenge a lion. He's a loser, at the bottom of the line. And he also challenges Daryl Brennan. Things aren't going to end well for him," said another man laughingly. Alex sneered. All the people commenting about his job were Texans in Washington. Even if he was a pancake seller, he didn't look down on himself. He had come to the Ruby Hotel because he had promised Philippa. He had not expected that such a negative situation would develop. "Why am I still here?" he thought. Alex stood up and walked to the door. The others saw him trying to leave, and they thought that he was ashamed of himself and too embarrassed to stay. "Don't go. Alex, stop," Miriam called while moving towards him. He heard her voice and felt angry. He was also anxious to see his mother. When he reached for the door, it swung open and a man in his 40s with a big belly walked into the room. It was Lester Yates, who was the organizer of this meeting. "Who is this?" Lester looked at Alex's face, but he didn't appear to recognize him. However, his eyes twitched slightly. "Mr. Yates, this is one of our guests, so don't let him go," Miriam said to him. She had walked over to Alex and caught him. She winked at Lester and said with a smile, "Mr. Yates, Alex had a bad time with everyone just now." "Ah," Lester laughed and patted him on the shoulder. "It's okay. Everyone's a fellow Texan. They're all joking, so you shouldn't take anything too seriously. For my sake, how about you go and sit down?" Alex found it hard to refuse Lester, so he gave him a look and took his seat again. "Sorry, don't take their words to heart," Philippa whispered to Alex as she felt guilty. This made him feel a little relieved. Inside the Ruby Hotel's most luxurious meeting room, the boss of the Cracks & Co. company was standing beside a beautiful middle-aged woman who was Alex's mother, Flora. The other man at the table in room 888 was Ken Stokes. Flora had come back to the U.S. for business reasons. She had also wanted to take the opportunity to visit her son. After learning that Alex's poverty training was over, she had begun to prepare for her trip when she would finally see him. On the eve of her return, she had heard that her son was being punished by the family again, and Alex wasn't allowed to use any of the family resources. "What's the difference between this and another poverty training for my son?" she thought. So as soon as she had returned to the U.S., she had secretly made an appointment with Ken, the person in charge of the East Coast Division. She wanted him to take care of her son. However, after talking with him for a long time, he did not dare to agree to her request. She was helpless, but she could understand his position. After all, the sanction for Alex was by order of the family. If Ken dared to bend the law for selfish reasons, he would be severely punished by the family. She waited for Alex and then called in Frank Dreck, the owner of the Ruby Hotel, and said, "You go to room 304 and see what stage their party is at. Look out for this young man." She showed him a picture of Alex on her phone screen that Ken had sent her. "Yes, ma'am," he agreed respectfully. Although he didn't know this middle-aged beauty, he recognized Ken, who was the man of the day in Chicago. In the whole East Coast Division, the officials at all levels understood that they should be polite to this beautiful woman. How dare he ignore her, thought. Mr. Dreck left and went to room 304. In room 304, Lester and Miriam were chatting, and Lester said some polite words. "Mr. Yates, why did you get this pancake seller to come back? Do people here want to buy pancakes from him?" A young man who was sitting nearby had made this remark, causing a burst of laughter, and some people began to taunt Alex. Well, it's not good for us to brush people off. After all, we're Texans, and we should be tolerant of others. Lester walked around the room and pointed to Alex. Alex, please stand up. Alex respected Lester, so he stood up. You may not know Alex, of course. I don't know him either, but I met him by chance today. I can share with you a little bit to let you know who he is, said Lester. The other people were puzzled. Was it possible that the pancake seller had an unknown side? Alex was stunned. Did Lester buy pancakes from me today? He thought. He tried to recall the customers he had served that day, but he couldn't remember having seen Mr. Yates. Today, I saw an encounter between a tramp and an old lady with a bicycle. Alex took the initiative to help the old lady pick up some things she dropped on the ground. Originally, I thought he was a good guy, but unexpectedly, he asked the old lady for money, said Lester. Lester had recognized Alex when he had first seen him at the door. The previous day, Miriam had asked him to help her humiliate him, so he had detained Alex to keep him in the room. The people present again started expressing their opinion. What? I thought this man was poor, but I didn't expect that he would have moral problems too, said a man with disgust. I want to send him to the police station. It's disgraceful for us Texans, said another in a bitter voice. Alex was really disappointed. He had not expected that Lester wanted to retain him. Seeing that he and Miriam had exchanged glances, Alex laughed bitterly. It turned out that everything was a setup by Miriam for her own goals. Let him go! We won't welcome such a morally corrupt person, exclaimed a woman with disgust. Yes, he's a disgrace. My food won't stay down if he's here, replied a man angrily. Even if they didn't chase Alex away, he didn't want to stay in the room any longer. He looked at these ugly people and prepared to go to the door. Stop! Shouted Lester. Lester stopped Alex with a sneer on his face. You think you're at home here? Do you think you could just come and go as you please? You need to pay for your meal first. If you don't have anything more to eat, you can leave me $100. Philippa couldn't take it anymore. She stood up and said to him, Mr. Yates, you said that today was your treat and that we wouldn't have to pay for it. Lester sneered. I did say that, but I invited Texans. I invited honest people. If somebody else turns up who's poor and dirty like him and with poor moral character, why should I pay for him? Philippa bit her lip, as she thought that she had misled Alex. But Alex only ate a little bit. How can you make him pay $100? On average, a meal here is $100. When he leaves, who's going to eat the rest of his unfinished meal? Lester said. There were 3 knocks on the door and a man came in. It was Frank Dreck. Mr. Dreck immediately spotted the young man that the middle-aged beauty had shown him a picture of and asked him to look out for. He was surprised. He was unaware of the relationship between the beautiful woman and the youth. When he saw how badly dressed Alex was, he naturally didn't imagine that the woman was this poorly dressed young man's mother. Mr. Dreck. Seeing Dreck, Lester quickly welcomed him into the room. Have you come to see us? Everyone, I'd like to introduce you to Mr. Dreck, owner of the Ruby Hotel. After hearing Lester's introduction, everyone stood up and greeted him. Oh, you're holding a meeting here. I wish you all a good time. Dreck acknowledged the guests and asked Lester, Mr. Yates, what's wrong with this young man? Oh, Mr. Dreck, don't worry about him. This is what happened. Lester roughly told him about what Alex had done and finally said, I can't let a person with bad qualities like this have a free meal. So if he can't pay for the meal today, I'll just let him work for it. Drek nodded, added a few polite words, and walked out of the room. He went back to report to the beautiful woman in room 888. Episode 184, A Shrew and a Loser. Mr. Yates, you're really amazing. Mr. Drek hardly comes out to greet anyone, said someone from the crowd. Yes, the Ruby is one of the top hotels in Washington, D.C. Mr. Drek's fortune is at least several $1 million. Even when the local rich people come, he doesn't show up in person. We're outsiders to him, but not to Mr. Yates, said a woman with a smile. There's a future to following Mr. Yates, said a man with a big smile. The guests were all praising Lester, but he could only smile awkwardly. He had not yet figured out why Drek would come to see him. Although he had some achievements to his name in Washington, his business wasn't that big. In terms of his wealth, he may not even rank in the top 300 in the city. But anyway, Drek had stopped by, which was always a good thing. Lester took the opportunity to boast, trying to take advantage of this moment to reinforce his position as leader of the Texans in the Washington group. Mr. Drek and I have known each other for a long time. The last time I went to Chicago, Mr. Drek and Mr. Ken Stokes paid me a special visit. We had dinner together. Are you friends with Mr. Stokes? Asked the same man curiously. In several nearby states, people from all walks of life have to show Mr. Stokes respect. Mr. Yates, can you introduce us? Asked another inquisitively. The other people in the room admired Lester even more. It was amazing to have a connection with Ken Stokes. It's hard to say if I can. If I have a chance in the future, I'll invite Mr. Stokes to one of our meetings, but let's have dinner first, he said. When he finished speaking, all the others sat down at their tables. Mr. Yates, this man has not left yet. Miriam took his arm and looked at Alex with a sneer. When she heard that Lester knew Ken, who was such a powerful figure, she had an idea for getting rid of her boyfriend Jake. Boy, can you afford to pay for your meal? If you can't afford to pay, you can report to the hotel and do some chores for them to pay it off, said Lester. I'll step out and get some money, Alex said. My mother is here. I'll go ask her for some money to pay him back, he thought. Oh, you think I'm a fool, do you? I don't think you can afford it. If you run out this door, you're probably not coming back, said Lester. Yes, how can a pancake seller pay for this meal? Said a young man. Remember Miss Miriam's story about the Crown Hotel? He probably doesn't have much money. If you can't afford it, you should go to work for the hotel, said Lester. Who said that he can't afford it? The sound of a woman's voice came from the door. A beautiful middle-aged woman quickly walked in. She was wearing a long black dress with sheer fabric covering her shoulders. Her hair was tied back and revealed her gold earrings. She had big, bright eyes and emitted the charm of a mature woman. It was Alex's mother, Flora. Her face was full of beauty. After seeing his mother for the first time in 7 years, Alex heard her voice but wanted to stop her from speaking. She had come to visit Alex behind the family's back. In front of so many people, they still needed to maintain their status as the reclusive Ambrose family. She walked in by herself, and then Ken and Drek followed her. She moved to the front in a dignified manner and sat on a chair. Ken and Drek stood on both sides of her. Alex also stood beside her. Who is that? The guests were looking at each other and didn't recognize the woman who had just walked in and didn't even look at them. Mr. Drek, you... Lester knew nothing about the other two, so he had to ask Drek. Drek was about to say something, but Flora nodded her head slightly at him, so he obediently closed his mouth. Who is Miriam? Stand up for me, now, Flora commanded. Miriam heard her name and was shocked. She stood up. What did you say about this young man? Flora asked her with a smile. But to Miriam, her smile was weird and terrifying. In front of this woman, she felt like a primary school student. She was flustered and dared not to lie to her. There's a security guard for the building outside, Miriam said as Flora slowly stood up and walked over to her. Flora grabbed Miriam by the hair and slapped her hard on one side of her face. She let go of her hair and returned to her chair, where she sat staring at Miriam. Miriam felt dizzy, but fortunately, she was held upright by the people around her. The guests near her were afraid of Flora, so they didn't dare to intervene. Which one of you is Lester? Get over here. Flora didn't take them seriously at all. The crowd became excited. The middle-aged beauty was so strong that she even spoke to Lester this way. I'm here. Lester was still trying to figure out who this woman was. When he had heard her coming, he had slowly blended in with the group. How could he bear such humiliation in front of so many people? He strode up to Flora and said, I'm Lester. Who are you? Who am I? You don't have the right to ask me this question, she sneered. When I walked into this room, I heard that you were shouting about losing money. What's the matter? Lester answered Flora's question in a meaningful way. That boy ate my food, so shouldn't he give me money to pay for it? But he can't afford to pay, so I'll leave him here to work it off, said Lester. So, you said he can't afford it? Flora said with a sneer. She asked, What else did you say with that stinky mouth of yours? Although she scolded him for his bad mouth, he felt that as long as he didn't cause a conflict with this woman, he could take advantage of the moment. Of course he can't afford it. I saw it with my own eyes outside. The boy asked an old lady for money. If he had money, why would he ask an old lady for her money? He said. Tell me clearly, why did he want money from an old lady? Flora asked, as she didn't believe that her son would take money from a poor old woman. I heard the boy call the old lady his mother. The woman was maybe 70 or 80 years old, so she can't be the boy's mother. Although I only heard a few words, I'm guessing that the boy must have a mother but wasn't taught well by her. So now he's turned into this mess, said Lester. Hey, yes, what child who has a mother would dress so badly? Said a woman from the crowd. A child without a mother is like a weed, which means they must be pitied, the man said. The other people echoed his observation. When Alex looked at his mother, his eyes were watering and tears started to form. He was so distressed that he wanted to hug her so that she would not be so sad. Flora stood up, rushed over to Lester, and hit him in the mouth. When she tried to hit him again, he grabbed her hand. Let go, she said angrily. Hey, you're a vicious shrew, he exclaimed. Alex interrupted him and moved to kick him in the chest. He fell to the ground. Alex pulled his mother to his side and asked anxiously, What are you doing? He wanted to understand why she acted like she didn't recognize him, so he didn't call her by her name. Child, she said with tearful eyes, and stretched out her hand to gently touch his face. Lester had been helped up off the ground. Look at this. A shrew and a loser dare to bully me. Do you think I deserve to be bullied? Fellow Texans, help me fight these two people. Who's the bravest here? I'll help you solve any future problems that you encounter in this city, said Lester. Lester had great prestige among these people. When he said this, several men got up to attack Alex and Flora. All of a sudden, Drek and Ken were in front of Alex and Flora. Mr. Drek, please get out of the way. If there are any damages to the room, I'll pay you twice as much. You can see that these two people are so arrogant. I need to get my revenge, so I don't look like a fool in front of the Texans. Lester was furious. You want revenge? Don't make a fool of yourself. Go apologize to this lady. You can't afford the consequences of offending her, advised Drek. Mr. Drek, you really look down on me. Although I'm a stranger, I deserve some respect. I've been humiliated so much today, and now you want me to apologize to this woman? Asked Lester. I don't know who this rich woman is, but I'm not afraid of her like you are. I'm one of the top 10 richest people around here, and I want my revenge. Lester knew that this woman couldn't be part of the Washington elite. As long as the woman wasn't one of the top 10, he really didn't care about her. Several of Lester's fellow Texans started bluffing. Mr. Yates knows Ken. Are you better than Mr. Stokes? Said a woman snootily. You should apologize quickly to Mr. Yates, and he might be able to forgive you, said another man with pity. Ken looked solemnly at Lester and asked, Have you really met Ken Stokes in person? Do you know what he looks like? Of course. If you're smart, you'll get out of my way, or... Lester also wanted to frighten them with Ken's name. But he started to panic when he noticed that the man standing in front of him had been silently staring back at him. He felt that he must be somebody important. He looked at Ken and asked, Who are you? Who do you think I am? Ken sneered. Lester panicked, and he looked over at Drek. Mr. Drek? Who is he? Drek snorted and said with a sarcastic smile, He's the famous Ken Stokes, Mr. Stokes of the East Coast Division. In the end, it turned out that the man standing in front of Lester was the famous Ken Stokes. Episode 185, Mother's Brutal Revenge. How could he be? Said Lester. He looked at Ken in a panic. Ken looked back at him with a smile. Lester couldn't help but tremble, and his brain buzzed. He had to react with caution. Mr. Drek had no reason to lie to him. Ken Stokes was the man. Mr. Stokes, I'm sorry. I've offended you. Lester was so frightened that he knelt down. Although he had never met Ken, he had heard a lot about his deeds. Besides being courteous to people from all walks of life, he was even more daunting, as it was said that he held at least dozens of lives in his hands. And he had just been so rude to this man. If he got on Ken's bad side, the consequences would be unimaginable. Lester wanted to eliminate Ken's anger as quickly as possible, so kneeling down in front of him was his best idea. Huh? The other people were looking at each other. So, he hasn't met Ken? Why is he kneeling down all of a sudden? Is the man in front of him really Ken? The others thought. After the guests realized what had happened, their hearts began to pound, and their legs became weak. There were soft sighs around the room as nearly 100 people present started to kneel down in fear. Mr. Stokes, I'm sorry. I didn't really know you. I've offended you. I'm no better than a pig or a dog, said Lester in a nervous voice while kneeling in front of him. Ken kicked Lester in the head. He screamed and fell to the ground. He quickly got up but knelt down again and continued. Good fight. Yes, that was a good kick to my head. Ken snorted and went back to Flora. What do you think we should do? Her mood had calmed down. She stood up and walked over to Lester slowly. Lester's heart was beating more violently. Ken was respectful to this woman as if he were her subordinate. What is her status? He thought. As Lester knelt, he watched a pair of high-heeled shoes walking toward him. He heard the clicking footsteps, which made him shiver. "Look at me," Flora commanded. After hearing her voice, his heart leapt out of his throat. "Yes?" he replied in a panic and slowly lifted his head. When he saw her sneering face, he seemed to smile like a slave at his master. She grabbed his hair, touched his face, and slapped him mercilessly 6 times. She let go of him, and he felt his face burn and start to swell. A hot stream began to flow from his nostrils, which he wiped and saw that his hands were stained with blood. "Please forgive me. Please forgive me." He had been beaten and didn't dare to make this woman dissatisfied with him. He was still smiling and begging her to forgive him. The other people in the room also whispered for their forgiveness. "A bunch of idiots can't even figure out who they should be apologizing to. Do they want to live?" she said coldly. Without the strength of the Ambrose family, it was difficult to deal with 100 people at the same time. But if the family wanted to, it would not have been impossible. Lester was the first to react. He turned his head to Alex and said, "I'm sorry. I'm a fool. I'm nothing to you. Can you please forgive me?" "Yes, we're terrible people. Please forgive us." All the people there started apologizing. "I was wrong. It was me who had looked down on others with contempt," said Lester. "So, what do you think we should do to deal with these dogs?" Flora asked Alex as she turned to look at him. "I think they've scolded themselves enough. As long as they don't bother me again in the future, I don't think we need to do anything more," Alex said. This group of people had only looked down on him and mocked him a few times, so their harshness towards themselves was too much. In addition, Lester and Miriam, who had been fanning the flames, had been slapped hard on the face. Alex felt that what they owed him had been paid back, so there was no need to continue punishing them. "That won't do," Flora sighed. 7 years later, her son was still so generous. They had insulted him, and now he was just letting them off the hook. But she couldn't easily let go of their comments about his mother. She glanced at the dishes on the tables around the room and got an idea. She turned to the large group of people and said, "Everybody stand up, pick up your dishes off the table, and put them down on the ground." Lester and the group stood up and spent the next 2 minutes putting all the dishes from the tables onto the ground. Everyone lowered their heads in fear, as they didn't know what she was going to do next. She said, "You can eat your food off the ground, but you can't use forks or knives." There were sighs among the crowd, and someone muttered in a low voice, "How can I eat without cutlery?" Flora said with a proud smile, "I don't care how you eat it. You can eat it off your plate with your hands, or you can get down on the ground and lick it off, just so long as you eat all of your meal, and then you can go. You, take away all the cutlery from the tables. If they can't finish eating, they're not allowed to leave," she told Drek. "Yes, ma'am," he replied respectfully. He ordered the waiters to collect all the forks and knives off the tables. "Let's go," Flora said when she saw that everything was as she wanted it. Alex, Ken, and Drek followed her to the door. Alex glimpsed at Philippa, who was standing in the crowd with a frown on her face. He smiled faintly, walked over to her, and pulled her away from the group. He asked his mother, "Can we let this girl leave now?" "Okay, it's up to you." Flora thought that Alex intended to deal with her, so she didn't object. Thank you," Philippa repeatedly thanked Flora. She was overjoyed. She secretly looked at Alex and saw him smiling at her. She felt that he was so handsome at that moment that she couldn't help but smile back at him. After his mother had given Philippa permission to leave, Alex and Ken walked the young woman out. Flora then asked Drek to supervise the group that remained. She left with Alex and Ken and went to room 888. As soon as they walked into the room, Flora hugged Alex tightly. She called him son, and he called her mom. They both had tears in their eyes. They were just repeating the two words blindly and could not find any other words to express their inner feelings. The mother and son, who had been separated for 7 years, could hardly recognize each other. They had to wait until no outsider was present before they could talk to each other comfortably. Standing to one side, Ken couldn't help but turn his head away and wipe his tears with his hand. "Well, Alexei, let's not cry or let Mr. Stokes see this," she said to her son after holding him for a long time. She finally let go of him and wiped her tears. "I'm very glad to see mother and son reunite," said Ken with a faint smile. "Mr. Stokes, it's been a long time since we've seen each other," said Alex as he greeted him. "I didn't answer the phone before because the family doesn't allow subordinates to answer your calls. I hope you'll forgive me." He thought of Alex's several prior phone calls and felt very guilty about not having responded. "It's okay. I don't blame you," Alex said with a light smile. Flora asked Alex and Ken to sit down and eat with her. Alex had not been eating well these days, so he tucked into the delicious food. "Slow down. No one will take your food away from you." Flora couldn't help but feel sad as she watched her son eat. "Alexei, listen to your mother and give up looking for that Debbie girl," she said. "If you give up looking for Debbie, you'll be able to restore your identity within the Ambrose family, and you won't have to suffer anymore." Alex shook his head slowly and said, "I found her, but she refuses to recognize me. I want to be with her. Mom, I can't live without her." Hearing that Alex had found Debbie, Ken was stunned. Since the family had ordered him to stop looking for her, he had not taken any further action. Alex had unexpectedly found her using his own abilities. He felt that he had to report this to the rest of the family. "Silly child, I heard that she's just a country girl. You should know that accepting such a background into our family is more difficult than trying to ascend into the heavens. Do you not want to inherit?" Flora started to say, as she looked a little tense. She wanted to ask him if he didn't want to inherit the family properties. Realizing that Ken was still there, she closed her mouth. She just looked at Alex anxiously. Alex had been able to accept 7 years of poverty training in order to finally attain his position within the family. Now he was desperate to find this girl named Debbie. Isn't he setting up obstacles for himself? He might even lose his family rights, thought Ken. "Mother, are you not from an ordinary family? Your family was different from the Ambrose family for sure. I want Debbie. I'll fight for her. When I was a child, did you not often say to me that you must grasp something you like with all your strength? Debbie is the one I want. You weren't lying to me, were you?" said Alex. "Stinky boy," Flora laughed and scolded him. Seeing her son's indifference, she looked at him for a few seconds, sighed gently, and turned to Ken. "Mr. Stokes, you see, Alexei's like this. I know that Alexei once spoke up for you on Harmony Island. Can't you really consider what I said to you earlier?" Previously, she had asked Ken to secretly help Alex. However, he had been inflexible and refused. She could see that he was also very worried about her son's situation, and that he was trying to understand her feelings. "This," murmured Ken. He was in a very difficult position. When he had seen the bad state her son was in, he had become equally distressed. However, he had received a firm order from the top echelons of the family, and he couldn't disobey it, especially as he was the person in charge of the East Coast Division. "Mom, don't embarrass Mr. Stokes anymore. I'm living a full life now. You can rest assured that I'll get rid of this awkward situation, and you can have a daughter-in-law as soon as possible." Alex smiled, implying that the Ambrose family would accept Debbie and everything would be okay in the future.
Thank you for listening to Crown TV. Please don't forget to subscribe, share and turn on the notification button.